The classroom buzzed with restless chatter, the kind that always seemed louder when the air was thick with heat. Fans whirred lazily overhead, doing little more than stirring the stifling summer air. Little Michael Jackson, only 9 years old, sat at the very back of the room, knees pressed together, hands clutching his notebook like it was a lifeline. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears, a nervous drumbeat that matched the jittery energy of his classmates. Today was music class, the 1 hour each week when he felt, however briefly, like he belonged somewhere. Miss Hargrove, a stern woman with sharp eyes and hair pulled tightly into a bun, stood at the front, tapping her ruler against the desk. "All right, everyone, time to sing," she barked, her voice slicing through the classroom. "Michael Jackson, you first." Michael froze. He wasn't ready, not really. His hands shook as he lifted the notebook and opened it to the page he had scribbled notes and lyrics on the night before, under the dim glow of a single lamp. His mother had been asleep, weary from her double shifts, and he hadn't wanted to wake her. But he had to try. He had to show that even if the world told him no, he could still try. Clearing his throat, he took a small, tentative breath and began. The first notes were soft, almost inaudible, trembling like a bird too afraid to leave the nest. The words stumbled from his lips, not perfectly, but with all the honesty and passion of a boy who dreamed bigger than his small, sunlit bedroom. For a few fleeting moments he felt weightless, like he could soar above the desks and the chairs, beyond the cramped walls of the classroom and the doubting eyes of the world. Then came the voice of judgment, sharp and unrelenting. "Michael," Miss Hargrove's voice cut through him like glass. He flinched. "Stop it. That's enough." The words pierced deeper than any slap or push. The other children had gone quiet now, their eyes darting between him and the teacher, some stifling giggles, others staring in stunned silence. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" she snapped, leaning over the desk, her gaze cold and unyielding. "You'll never be a singer. Do you hear me? Never. You're wasting everyone's time, especially your own." Michael's stomach dropped. The notebook slipped from his trembling hands, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. His face burned hot with shame. The sound of laughter, faint but sharp, erupted from the corners of the room. A few kids smirked, whispering behind their hands. It was like the air had thickened, pressing down on him from all sides. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the floorboards, to vanish completely. The dreams he had clung to so tightly, the songs he imagined singing in bright lights, the applause, the joy that filled him when music touched his soul, felt shattered in an instant. The world had spoken, and it had told him he was nothing. The bell rang loud and shrill, signaling the end of class, but instead of relief it brought only a hollow emptiness. Michael shuffled to the door, shoulders hunched, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. Miss Hargrove called after him, but he ignored her, head down, stepping over the scattered papers, over the quiet whispers of his classmates. Outside the classroom, the sun was harsh, glaring, as if it too were judging him. He walked the hallway alone, each step echoing in the empty corridors, carrying the weight of words that might never leave him. His small hands balled into fists, nails biting into his palms, as if to keep himself from collapsing entirely. In that moment, all the boy saw was the end of his dream. The music that had always lifted him now seemed like a cruel joke, a thing he was never meant to touch, yet deep inside, a tiny spark, fragile and stubborn, refused to die. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the last flicker of a candle in a storm. Michael didn't know it yet, but that spark would not go out. It would survive the harsh words, the doubt, the years of struggle ahead. For now, though, all he could do was walk, silent and broken, holding on to a hope so small it might have been invisible. The boy who would one day change the world was trembling in the hallway, unheard, uncelebrated, but not yet defeated. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the old ceiling fan that rattled with every turn. Michael sank onto the worn sofa, the fabric frayed at the edges, and hugged his knees tightly. He could still feel the sting of Miss Hargrove's words, sharp as glass against his small heart. "You'll never be a singer." The memory replayed over and over, like a cruel record stuck on the worst possible note. The room smelled faintly of yesterday's dinner, burnt rice, and a lingering sweetness from the small loaf of bread his mother had managed to buy on her shift, and a hint of old dust that clung stubbornly to the corners. Michael let out a shuddering breath, trying to make sense of the emptiness he felt. His mother, tired and weary, hummed softly in the kitchen, washing dishes in silence. She never asked about his day, or maybe she did in her own quiet way, because she had nothing left to give after working double shifts, just to make ends meet. Michael knew she loved him. He could feel it in the small gestures, the fresh towel folded neatly on the couch, the warm plate of rice left on the table. But love wasn't enough to fix the hollow ache inside him. He leaned his head against the sofa, staring at the peeling wallpaper, tracing the faded patterns with his eyes, wishing he could disappear into them. The tears he had been holding back in class now threatened to spill. He pressed a hand to his mouth, swallowing them down, tasting the bitter sting of failure. Maybe she's right. He whispered to himself, maybe I'll never be good enough. But then, almost imperceptibly, a tiny spark flickered in the darkness of his despair. Michael remembered the nights he had sneaked into the kitchen, listening to his father hum soft tunes while fixing a broken lamp or reading the newspaper. He remembered how his small cousin had clapped for him last Christmas when he sang a little song by the fire, and how the warmth of that applause had made his heart feel like it could burst. He reached for the notebook he had tucked under the sofa cushion, the one he had filled with scribbled lyrics and shaky notes. His fingers traced the lines he had written, the words dancing faintly in the dim light. He blew softly on the page, as if blowing dust off an old treasure, and whispered, maybe I can still try. It was a fragile thought, barely a flicker, but it was enough to stop him from curling into a ball completely. Enough to remind him that somewhere inside he still believed. He thought about the little moments when music had felt like magic, the way his fingers itched to tap rhythms on the table, the way his voice had soared when he had sung quietly to himself under the blankets at night. That spark, however faint, refused to die. Michael pressed his forehead to the notebook, breathing in the faint smell of pencil and paper. One day, he murmured, someone will hear me, someone will really listen. The words felt almost foolish, fragile as a leaf in the wind, but they held a weight that made his chest feel lighter. Even in the face of humiliation, he clung to them like a lifeline. His mother's soft humming drifted through the room again, a gentle reminder of the world continuing outside his pain. Michael closed his eyes and imagined a stage, bright lights warming his face, an audience quiet and waiting. He imagined the sound of his voice filling the air, carrying every ounce of his heart, every tear, every hope he had ever dared to dream. He didn't know how he would get there. He didn't know if anyone would believe in him again. But that night, in the quiet of a small, dim apartment, Michael made a promise to himself. He wouldn't give up, no matter the words, no matter the doubt, no matter how many times the world told him no. He would hold on to the smallest spark of hope. The next morning, the school halls buzzed with the usual chaos. Lockers slamming, kids shouting across the corridor, the scraping of sneakers against linoleum. Michael shuffled along, keeping his gaze low, trying to make himself invisible. But some people, it seemed, saw what others ignored. Mr. Thompson, the janitor, was one of those people. A tall man with a stooped back and hair that had once been black but now shimmered silver. He moved quietly through the hallways, broom in hand, eyes scanning the world with gentle attention. Most kids barely noticed him, thinking of him only as a fixture, someone who cleaned up after them, emptied trash and disappeared. But Mr. Thompson had a way of seeing people, really seeing them, especially those who were quietly hurting. It was the soft patter of rain against the windows that morning that brought Michael into the empty music room. He lingered, pretending to look at the piano and sheet music, but really he was hiding from the world. The words from Miss Hargrove still echoed in his ears like thunder. You'll never be a singer. He pressed his face into his hands, trying not to let the tears come, but the weight of shame made it nearly impossible to breathe. You all right, son? A deep, gentle voice asked from the doorway. Michael looked up, startled. It was Mr. Thompson, leaning against the doorframe, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. His hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, but his eyes were warm and soft, like a blanket in winter. Michael opened his mouth to answer, but the words got stuck, swallowed by the lump of fear and doubt in his throat. Mr. Thompson didn't push. He crouched down to Michael's level, resting his hands on his knees. "You got a voice, kid." He said simply, "I don't know why they can't hear it, but it's there. Don't let 'em make you forget it." Michael blinked, unsure if anyone had ever spoken to him like that before. No one had looked at him and believed he mattered. Not really, not like this. The janitor reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, battered harmonica, its metal dulled with age. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Try this, just for yourself. Don't worry about anyone else." Michael hesitated. He'd never played a harmonica before, but there was something in the way Mr. Thompson offered it, not with judgment, not with expectation, just kindness, that made him take it. He blew softly, producing a thin, shaky note. It squeaked almost comically, but Mr. Thompson nodded, like he had heard a symphony. "That's real. That's you," he said. "You don't need anyone's approval to know what you can do." Michael felt something stir deep in his chest, a spark that he hadn't realized was still alive. It was small at first, flickering uncertainly, but it was there, hope fragile and stubborn. He tried another note, a little stronger this time, and Mr. Thompson smiled, clapping softly. "You got it, kid. Just keep at it," he said. "Don't let 'em tell you who you are or what you can't do. Music's yours. Own it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael believed someone saw him. Not the shy, awkward boy the world dismissed, but the boy who loved music with every beat of his heart. And in that quiet, unexpected act of kindness, a simple harmonica, a few words of faith, Michael felt something he had almost forgotten, that the world wasn't entirely cruel, and that maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. Mr. Thompson straightened up, rested a hand on Michael's shoulder, and gave him a wink. "I'll be around if you need a listener. No judgment, just someone to hear you." Michael nodded, clutching the harmonica to his chest like a precious treasure. The rain continued to patter against the windows, but now it felt different. Softer, gentler, like it was washing away the last remnants of doubt. And in that moment, Michael realized that sometimes the smallest gestures, the kind words of a stranger, the patience of someone who truly sees you, can ignite a fire strong enough to change a life forever. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. But Michael never forgot that first moment with Mr. Thompson. Every day after school, he found himself lingering in the hallways a little longer, waiting for the janitor's gentle smile and the quiet encouragement that had stirred something in his young heart. At first, their meetings were brief, just a few words exchanged, a nod, a quiet harmonica lesson in an empty classroom. But over time, they began to grow into something more, something neither of them expected. Mr. Thompson started showing Michael little tricks, ways to feel the rhythm in his chest, how to let the music flow without fear. "It ain't about perfection," he said one rainy afternoon, leaning on the broom as Michael tried another shaky note. "It's about honesty. Every note you sing, every note you play, it's gotta be yours. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Michael's voice improved slowly, but the transformation was more than just technical. With each lesson, the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble. He laughed more freely, cried without shame, and started to believe, not just in music, but in himself. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the dusty windows of the music room, Michael confided something he had never said out loud. I thought I was nothing," he whispered, voice trembling, eyes downcast. Mr. Thompson shook his head, resting a hand on the boy's small shoulder. "You're everything, kid. Everything you need is already inside you. You just gotta let it out." Tears pricked Michael's eyes, and he let them fall freely this time. For so long he had held back, afraid that showing emotion would make him weak. But here, with someone who had no reason to care yet had chosen to, He could let himself be vulnerable. Mr. Thompson's own eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You remind me of me when I was your age," he said softly, "trying to reach for something bigger than I thought I deserved. Don't make that mistake, son. You deserve it all." Days bled into evenings, and their bond deepened. Sometimes they would sit in silence, Michael practicing while Mr. Thompson tapped a gentle beat on the desk, just to keep the rhythm alive. Other times they laughed over Michael's off-key notes or clumsy attempts at harmonica riffs. Slowly, the music room became their sanctuary, a place where judgment didn't exist and dreams were allowed to breathe. But it wasn't just Michael who grew. Mr. Thompson, whose life had been filled with disappointments and missed chances, found a renewed purpose in these quiet lessons. The boy's courage, his willingness to try again even after being humiliated, reminded the janitor of the power of belief. He wept quietly one evening, watching Michael belt out a simple song with confidence, a sound that carried hope into the dim corners of the room. Michael, in turn, began to see the world differently. He learned that kindness didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it was a harmonica in a janitor's hands, a few quiet words in a quiet room. And with that understanding, he started to believe that the same world that had told him no could also be a world that said yes, a world that could lift him up if only someone took the time to notice. One rainy afternoon, as Michael left the music room, he turned back to see Mr. Thompson standing there, broom in hand, watching him with a smile that said more than words ever could. Michael smiled back, tears still clinging to the edges of his lashes. He knew that without this man, without his quiet acts of faith and love, he might have given up long ago. In that room, in those small, slow moments, something miraculous had happened. A boy who had once been told he was nothing was learning to believe he was everything. And a man who had thought his kindness was small had discovered that it had the power to shape a life, to heal a heart, and to spark a flame that would one day light up the world. For Michael, every note he played, every song he sang, was no longer just music. It was gratitude, it was hope, it was love in its purest form. And every time he lifted the harmonica, every time he opened his mouth to sing, he carried the quiet, powerful presence of the man who had refused to let him believe he was invisible. Years had passed since those quiet afternoons in the music room, and the boy who had once shivered under the weight of humiliation now walked onto the stage of America's Got Talent with a calm, assured presence. The arena lights were blinding, warm beams that danced across the faces of thousands of strangers, yet Michael didn't falter. He held the microphone firmly, feeling the familiar hum of energy in his chest, the same pulse he had learned to find in the rhythm of his own heart. The audience hushed as he lifted the harmonica to his lips and began to play. The notes trembled at first, delicate as a morning mist, then grew stronger, richer, soaring through the arena like a bird finally released. Every word, every note, carried the weight of years of doubt, of quiet pain, of nights spent imagining a world that might one day see him for who he truly was. The judges sat in stunned silence. Simon Cowell, the famously unshakable critic, rested his hand over his mouth, eyes glistening with tears he could no longer hide. Michael's voice wasn't just music. It was a story, a confession, a gift to anyone who had ever been told they were nothing. And then came the twist. At the crescendo of the performance, Michael stepped back and pointed toward the wings of the stage. The camera followed his gaze, and the audience gasped. There, seated in the front row, was Mr. Thompson, the janitor who had never expected fame or recognition, the man whose quiet belief had saved a boy from despair. His hair was more silver now, his face lined with age, but his eyes shone brighter than any stage light, brimming with tears. Michael's voice broke slightly as he spoke, addressing the man who had changed his life with a harmonica and a few simple words. "This is for you," he said, holding the harmonica up like a trophy. "Because of your faith in me, I am here today. Because of your kindness, I learned to believe in myself. I will never stop singing for you." The arena erupted into applause, a wave of sound that seemed to lift the roof off the building. People stood, some weeping openly, moved not just by the music, but by the story behind it. Michael knelt before Mr. Thompson, pressing the harmonica into his hands. The janitor's hands trembled as he held it, a lifetime of quiet sacrifice and unseen love now acknowledged in the most beautiful way. "Thank you, son," Mr. Thompson whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You did it, you really did it." Michael stood, his voice rising one last time, pouring every ounce of gratitude, love, and hope into the final note. The audience was on its feet. The judges wiped tears from their cheeks, and Simon Cowell, who had seen thousands of talented performers, finally broke down completely. For a man who rarely let himself feel, this was a moment that no amount of criticism or tough exterior could contain. Backstage, Michael embraced Mr. Thompson, the man who had taught him that one act of kindness could change a life forever. The boy who had been humiliated in a classroom years ago had become a man who reminded the world of something almost everyone forgets, that belief, love, and patience can turn even the smallest spark into a roaring flame. And as Michael waved to the cheering crowd, harmonica in hand, he whispered to himself, "It all started with you." Outside the arena, in the quiet of the night, the world seemed brighter, softer, more possible. Michael knew that his journey was far from over, but the most important part had already been written. A boy had been seen, believed in, and lifted from despair by the selfless act of a single kind soul. The music faded, but the lesson remained. Sometimes one person's faith can create miracles, and sometimes that miracle can change the course of a life and the world forever.